What happened in that congressional hearing room shocked everyone who witnessed it, because what started as routine questioning quickly transformed into something far more dangerous. A calculated exposure of contradictions that someone desperately wanted to keep buried. And the moment Representative Ted Lieu pulled out those documents, the entire atmosphere shifted. You could feel it, the tension, the silence, the unspoken truth hanging in the air like smoke. This wasn't politics. This was a reckoning. For months, the American public had been fed carefully crafted narratives about the Epstein files, promises of transparency, assurances of thorough investigations, claims that every lead had been followed. But when Ted Lieu stood up that day, armed with victim testimonies, FD 302 reports, and court documents, he wasn't there to play along with the script. He was there to expose it. And FBI Director Kash Patel sat across from him, calm, composed, seemingly unbothered by the storm that was about to break. Lieu started slowly, methodically. He didn't rush. He didn't raise his voice. Instead, he laid out a foundation of facts so solid that there would be no escaping what came next. He spoke about victims who had cooperated with federal investigators, women who had provided detailed accounts of their abuse, names, dates, locations, evidence that had been collected, documented, and filed away in the very systems Patel now controlled. Then came the question that would change everything. Director Patel, have you personally reviewed the FD 302 documents from the Southern District of New York investigation? The room went still. Every camera focused. Every reporter leaned forward, because everyone knew what those documents contained, or at least what they were rumored to contain. Patel's answer was careful, measured. The FBI has reviewed all materials, he said. Multiple administrations have examined these files. But notice what he didn't say. He didn't say he had personally read them. He didn't say the investigations were complete. He hid behind the bureaucracy, behind the collective FBI, rather than taking personal responsibility for what was or wasn't in those files. And Ted Lieu knew exactly what he was doing. So he pressed harder. Let me be specific, Director. According to victim testimonies in those FBI files, there are at least 20 men to whom Jeffrey Epstein trafficked victims. 20, including Jess Staley, the CEO of Barclays Bank, a royal prince, a Hollywood producer worth hundreds of millions, a prominent banker, a government official, a former politician, at least 6 billionaires. Are you telling this committee that none of these names warrant investigation? The contradiction was breathtaking. On one hand, Patel claimed the files had been thoroughly reviewed. On the other hand, he admitted no new investigations had been launched. No indictments, no public accountability. How could both things be true? Unless, of course, they weren't. Unless the review was a performance. A box-checking exercise designed to create the appearance of diligence while ensuring nothing actually changed. Because if you control what counts as credible evidence, you control who gets investigated and who gets protected. And that's exactly where Lieu struck next. Director, who determines what constitutes credible information? Is it you? Is it the FBI? Or is it the same system that has failed to hold a single powerful person accountable in over 2 decades? The question hung in the air like a challenge, because credibility isn't an objective measure. It's a judgment call. And when the institutions accused of covering up the truth get to decide what's credible about their own failures, that's not justice. That's control. Patel deflected. He spoke about legal constraints, about non-prosecution agreements, about jurisdictional limitations. But Lieu wasn't buying it. Those constraints apply to the Southern District of Florida, he corrected. They do not apply to the Southern District of New York. The 2019 indictment produced those FD 302s. The victims cooperated in that investigation. Their statements are in your possession. So I'll ask again, have you launched any investigations into these individuals? The silence that followed was deafening, because the answer was no, and everyone in that room knew it. No investigations, no subpoenas, no attempts to interview the men named in victim testimonies. Nothing. Just files sitting in cabinets while the clock ticked and the statute of limitations crept closer. But Lieu wasn't finished. He was just getting started. He pivoted to something even more explosive. The intelligence connections. The whispers that had circulated for years but were never fully investigated. The possibility that Epstein wasn't just a predator operating in the shadows, but an asset protected by them. Director, have you seen the documents suggesting Epstein had ties to intelligence agencies? Have you reviewed the reports about his meetings with CIA officials? About the calendar entries showing appointments with high-ranking government figures? Patel's response was a masterclass in bureaucratic evasion. We review all credible leads, he said. If there is such a file, and it has not been turned over to the FBI, we would look at it. But notice the language. If there is such a file. Not we're investigating it. Just a hypothetical. A possibility. A way to acknowledge the question without committing to an answer. And that's when Lieu brought out the documents that had been entered into the record. Articles quoting former Labor Secretary Alex Acosta, saying he was told Epstein belonged to intelligence and to leave it alone. Interviews with Epstein's own bodyguard warning about CIA connections. Fox Digital reports detailing Epstein's private calendar showing meetings with a former CIA chief and Obama administration officials. Wall Street Journal pieces documenting 36 meetings between Epstein and Ehud Barak, the former Israeli prime minister and head of military intelligence. All of it entered into the official record. Public, unavoidable. Director Patel, Lieu said, his voice steady but firm. These documents exist. They're part of the public record now. Will the FBI investigate these intelligence connections? Will you subpoena the CIA files on Jeffrey Epstein? Will you find out why a convicted sex offender had such extensive access to powerful people? The answer, when it came, was predictable. The FBI will look at any new investigative leads. Patel said, if there is such a file, and if it has not already been turned over, the same words, the same deflection, the same door that appeared open but was actually locked from the inside. And that's when the real truth became impossible to ignore. This wasn't about lack of evidence. It wasn't about insufficient leads. It wasn't about bureaucratic obstacles or jurisdictional boundaries. It was about power protecting itself. Because think about what was happening in that hearing. A congressman was reading names into the record. Powerful names, wealthy names, connected names. And the FBI director, the person theoretically in charge of investigating federal crimes, was admitting he hadn't personally reviewed the files containing victim testimonies about these men. How is that possible? How can the head of the FBI not have personally examined evidence related to one of the most notorious sex trafficking cases in American history? Unless, of course, he didn't want to know. Unless knowing would create an obligation to act. Unless acting would mean going after people too powerful to touch. Lieu understood this. That's why he kept pressing. Why he kept asking the same questions in different ways. Why he refused to let Patel hide behind procedural language and bureaucratic technicalities. Director, let me ask you this. If the FBI possesses files naming at least 20 men who are allegedly involved in sex trafficking, and those files contain victim testimonies, and those victims cooperated with federal investigators, how can you claim there are no credible leads? Who gets to make that determination? And what incentive does that person have to be honest about it? The question was devastating in its simplicity, because it exposed the fundamental conflict of interest at the heart of the entire investigation. The same institutions that may have enabled Epstein's crimes were now in charge of investigating them. The same people who might be named in the files were the ones deciding which leads were credible enough to pursue. It was like asking a fox to guard the henhouse, and then being surprised when the chickens kept disappearing. But here's what made this hearing different from all the others. Ted Lieu didn't just ask questions. He created a record. He forced answers onto the official transcript. He made it impossible for anyone to claim later that they didn't know, didn't see, or weren't informed. Every deflection, every evasion, every "I'll have to get back to you" was now part of the permanent record. Future investigators would be able to point to this hearing and say, they knew, they were told, they had the information, and they chose to do nothing. That's accountability, not the kind that sends people to prison immediately, but the kind that creates a paper trail, a historical record, evidence that can't be erased or denied. And as the hearing continued, Lieu moved to yet another angle, the financial trail, the money, Because if you want to understand who Epstein really was and who he was working for, you don't look at the sex, you look at the cash. Director, are you aware of the Treasury Department files showing over 4,000 wire transfers totaling more than $1 billion flowing through Epstein's accounts? Are you aware that some of these transfers went through Russian banks now under sanctions? Are you aware that these financial records could provide a roadmap to his entire network? Patel's answer was vague, non-committal. The FBI works with Treasury on financial investigations, he said. We follow the money where the evidence leads. But again, notice what he didn't say. He didn't say they were actively investigating those transfers. He didn't say they had identified the recipients. He didn't say they were pursuing leads. He just deflected. And that's when the full scope of the cover-up became clear. Because it wasn't just about protecting individual predators. It was about protecting an entire system, a network of power that spanned banks, governments, intelligence agencies, and elite social circles. Epstein wasn't the spider at the center of the web. He was just one strand, and cutting that strand wouldn't bring down the whole structure unless you were willing to follow it wherever it led, which, apparently, they weren't. As the hearing wound down, Lieu made one final push. He asked about the victims themselves, the women who had come forward, who had risked everything to tell their stories, who had provided the FBI with names, dates, details. Director, will you meet with these victims? Will you personally hear their accounts? Or will you continue to hide behind layers of bureaucracy while the people who hurt them walk free? For the first time, Patel seemed uncomfortable. He shifted in his seat. He avoided eye contact. He muttered something about the FBI meeting with anyone who has new information. But he didn't say yes. He didn't commit. He didn't promise. And in that moment, the mask slipped. Because this was never about justice. It was never about victims. It was about maintaining control. About deciding which truths get told and which ones stay buried. Ted Lieu knew he wouldn't get the answers he wanted that day. No one expected him to. But that wasn't the point. The point was to create a record, to force the contradictions into the open, to make it impossible for anyone to claim ignorance later. And he succeeded, because now when historians look back at this moment, they won't see a FBI director aggressively pursuing justice. They'll see a bureaucrat dodging questions. They'll see a system protecting itself. They'll see the exact moment when accountability was offered and refused. The hearing ended. The camera stopped rolling. The reporters filed their stories, and life went on. But the questions remained. Why won't they investigate the 20 men named in victim testimonies? Why won't they subpoena the CIA files? Why won't they follow the billion-dollar money trail? Why won't they meet with the victims? And most importantly, who are they protecting? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're demands for answers. And as long as those answers remain hidden, as long as those files stay sealed, as long as those names go unspoken, the Epstein scandal will never be over. Because it was never just about one man. It was about a system, a network, a structure of power that enables predators and protects the powerful. And until that system is exposed, until those connections are revealed, until those enablers face consequences, justice will remain unfinished. Ted Lieu did his part. He asked the questions. He created the record. He shone a light into the darkness. Now it's up to the rest of us to keep watching, keep asking, keep demanding, because silence is complicity, and the victims deserve better than that. The files exist. The names exists. The only thing missing is the will to use it. And until that changes, this story isn't over. It's just beginning.